Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ISC Square New Jersey chapter podcast, Unencrypted Chatter. Today, we're discussing CMMC compliance and the need for companies that do business with the government to get certified. I'm Richard Mendoza, one of your hosts, a senior VCISO at Compass MSP.
My name is Aneta Klepacka, and I am a member of ISC 2 New Jersey chapter.
Awesome. This episode will detail some specific steps you will need to take, and we're thrilled to be joined by Wesley Reinhart, who is the CMMC Program Director at Compass MSP, my colleague. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Just a quick intro on Wes. Wesley serves as the CMMC Program Manager at Compass MSP, where he leads compliance and cybersecurity initiatives for clients navigating CMMC compliance, ITAR requirements, and other regulatory frameworks. Overall, great guy. He provides great practical guidance on implementing secure architectures and efficient business processes that meet regulatory requirements. Wes, thank you so much for joining us today. Anything you want to say before we start to grill you on questions and dig out your expertise?
No, I just want to say thanks for having me, Rich and Aneta. Rich, I don't know if I'll be able to live up to that a good intro you did, but I'll try my best. Glad to be here and talk about my favorite subject in the world, compliance and CMMC.
So, Wes, can you walk us through what CMMC is, what is, why it was developed, and the urgency to get certified?
Sure. So CMMC stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and it basically came about because for quite a while now, defense contractors have been having to adhere to NIST 800-171 controls to protect their controlled unclassified information. With that, the DoD realized that not everyone was doing that. They were self-attesting to having a perfect SPRS score, which is how you measure and report your cybersecurity preparedness for protecting CUI. So what the DoD did is they decided that they needed to have basically an assessment for our contractors to make sure that everybody was complying with the requirements laid out in NIST 800-171. With that, they decided to have organizations be certified every 3 years with self-assessments in between. And the reason why this is so urgent right now is because the DoD recently passed a new rule stating that starting in November of 2025, no new Department of Defense contracts that deal with CUI would be able to be awarded both at a prime level and at a subprime level if they did not have CMMC level 2 certification.
So Wes, just from what you're saying, obviously CMMC feels like a lifeblood for organizations that are doing business with the government. So there seems to be an urgency around this, correct?
Yes, there is. In fact, I think a lot of people were playing a wait and see game to enact some of these controls that they need to become CMMC compliant because it's not always a cheap and easy lift for a company to enact all the controls and gather all the evidence that they need. So now that the final rule was passed, everyone is rushing to try to become compliant, within the next year with self-assessment starting in November. But even though the DoD has said self-assessments shall start in November, prime contractors can hold their subcontractors to a higher standard and require full third-party assessments before that. So we're really kind of waiting to see how the primes are going to handle this. I know that there's some primes out there that are already requiring the third-party assessment immediately, whereas others were expecting them to flow down to their smaller subcontractors, just self-assessment reported within this next year.
So, are the small companies treated differently from the large companies, or everyone has to comply with the same requirements?
That's a very good question, and unfortunately, everybody's treated exactly the same. If you're a huge defense contractor or a 10-person shop, you're expected to have the same protection around the data. And that is a problem for a lot of our smaller clients that we have that maybe don't have the financial resources to go right away and try to get everything that they need to become CMMC certified. But unfortunately, it's a business decision on if a small client can afford to play in the game to be able to get CMMC compliant. But if you're going to play in the defense industrial base, it's going to be a requirement, and there's no way around it. Even if you're not dealing with the Department of Defense directly as a small company, you're going to be getting flow down requirements from your prime contractors, because any contract they receive from the Department of Defense, they are required to ensure that their entire supply chain is following the same CUI handling rules that they have themselves.
Wes, that is awesome information. And I feel like a lot of companies are kind of leaning into this. Maybe they should have before, but now there's kind of this sense of urgency. I kind of have like a two-part question for you, and really just want to, because I'm sure people listening to this are going to want to just like really kind of hear about how this all works and how this process occurs, because it feels very complicated, right? And having obviously being able to work with you and hear this and see this, it does get very big. First question, can an organization do this on its own? And the second piece about this is, tell us about an engagement and how you approach the process.
Sure. So can an organization do it, a small organization do this on its own, or any organization? Yes, but it's very difficult if you don't have an embedded compliance department and cybersecurity staff. So the easiest way and the quickest way for them to do that is to get a consultant or an RPO, a registered organization that can do the consulting and the architecture design to ensure that the company is being compliant with CMMC. Compass MSP, where Rich and I work, we do provide consulting to make sure that our clients do get to a place where they're ready to sit for their C3PO assessment. And there's tons of companies just like that can help and want to help the defense industrial base get compliant. And with that, Rich, I think I talked for so long, I forgot the second part of the question.
No, I mean, like I said, all these are, and I shouldn't have like just kind of throw it on you, but I think it's so important to get as much information as we can in a short time. Having been on a few of these with you, clearly you're the expert. I was just kind of in the background. Kind of give some folks the idea and the thought of kind of how you would approach this and or maybe how they should approach this, because when I think of CMMC, it's huge, it's enormous, right? There's so many moving parts. So, kind of how do you do things kind of piece at a time, but what is your methodology? How do you come in? Because I'm sure companies are on their back foot and they're, kind of really, there's a lot of trepidation on how to do this. So explain your process and how you go about it.
Sure. So the very first thing I'll do is really have a tough conversation with the company and really see how much of their business that they have relies on DoD contracts. Because if it's something that maybe isn't a large part of their business, it may not be worth the time and treasure to go down the road of getting certified. And we revisit that question again a little later in the process, but I always like to start with it in the beginning, just so I'm not wasting their time if it is something very small for them. After that, I usually like to have a discovery and scoping exercise with them where we work with the company to map their CUI flow, define the boundary where the CUI lives, and identify, the right architecture to protect that CUI within the boundary, whether it's moving the entire company to a full tenant enterprise architecture where everything is in scope, or for our smaller companies, what we do a lot of times is try to make an enclave solution to kind of reduce the scope that would be assessed and where CUI would live to as small as possible, because it's easier to protect, and it also, reduces the cost of the solution. After we kind of do that scoping and we assess where the company is at to start with, we do a gap assessment and roadmap where we go control by control through everything, identifying any gaps they have and prioritizing any remediation risks based on risk and cost. A lot of it is moving to a secure place to handle the CUI, whether that's in GCC High for companies that like Microsoft, or AWS GovCloud, or moving to a solution in the secure Google Cloud like GCP. It's all a matter of what works for the business. And when we're going through all this, we really work with the different process owners at the company to try to determine what their business flow processes are on a daily basis, because the last thing we want to do is give them a solution that allows them to have CUI, but is so convoluted and hard to handle that, it really doesn't make any business sense for them because they can't get anything done anymore.
And not to cut you off, but everything you're saying here kind of feels like there needs to be a lot of engagement, right? There needs to be a lot of back and forth. This is not something you can come and do by yourself without a lot of information and institutional knowledge and really buy-in from the business owner, because you just really need that data to be able to provide a secure and hit those marks from a regulatory perspective. Does that make sense?
It completely makes sense. And, Rich, I think you bring home the best point there, that there's not executive level buy-in on this whole process from the very beginning. It's not going to be successful, because there is going to be a large initial outlay of money and resources to make this happen. There's going to be changes in business processes. We try to minimize those, but there's going to be that. And if you don't have the top level buy-in, who it will drive it for the organization and make it get important to them, so it'll be important to everyone at the company, then it's going to be a nightmare and not going to be implemented well, if at all.
That's awesome. That's great information.
Yeah.
So what happens if a company doesn't get certified, and what is the next step?
Well, so I guess it really depends. If the biggest thing to that, if they don't get certified, they're going to be cut off from receiving any contracts from the DoD or from primes that deal with the DoD. So that could dry up a significant portion of their business. If they actually go for a C3PAO assessment, there's basically 3 different outcomes that can come from that. They can meet all the requirements and essentially pass the assessment and become level 2 certified. They can pass or have a conditional pass where they have a few items that are POAMable, and they have to have those items closed out. I believe the period is up to 180 days, but it depends on the C3PAO and how long they have
real
to do
quick,
this.
Wes, when you say POAM, just for some folks who are not real clear on that, just to kind of understand what that is and kind of what that all means for someone who hasn't really delved into this aspect.
Yeah, my apologies. So it's a plan of action and milestones. So essentially, if there are a few items on the CMMC level 2 list that if you do not have the evidence to show that you have something met, or it's something that isn't fully implemented yet, and it's one of those items that's allowed to be so, you can have it placed on a plan of action and milestones where you'll have basically a provisional pass on the CMMC level 2 assessment, and have up to 180 days, depending on the date your C3PAO provides you, to get those items closed out and reassessed.
So that really seems to, once that clock starts ticking, there's obviously a significant urgency to kind of get this done. Is that fair?
Right. But there is a significant urgency, but there's also very few items that are allowed to be on a POAM list coming out of a CMMC assessment. Most of the items that you get assessed on, if you do not pass them, you don't pass if you don't meet them, you do not pass the assessment, and you will not be CMMC certified.
And that's kind of a lead in, and you touched on it before, and I think it's super important. I want to kind of dig into this. It feels very much, and like I said, been on a few of these, but really in the background. So you're more in the weeds of the conversation with folks that are kind of making the ultimate decision, and the business owners. Like when you're in those rooms and you're putting this out there and you're laying this out for them, and I think it's important for our listeners, how do you get leadership and staff on board with the CMMC changes? Like how do you, to your point you were talking before, if they're not on board, so how do you explain, how do you get them on board beyond just like, hey, you can't do business with the government? Like what's something you really kind of sell as like, hey, this is a huge thing, and here's how we do it?
Right. So right now, I think it may change later in the in the life cycle of CMMC as it grows and more people become compliant. But right now, the way I usually talk to the business owners or the executives I'm working with to convince them that they need to do this now is, if the faster they get certified, they may be the first person or the first company within, their particular DoD niche gets CMMC level 2 certified. And so that's going to be a business differentiator for them and potentially drive business their way. And if they get the new business established and have a good relationship with the primes or the DoD themselves, because they have become compliant, shown that they can protect the data that's entrusted to them, and have just generally better cybersecurity practices than anyone else, the DoD and the primes are going to be more comfortable sending more business their way. And so it's not only will garner them more business where they're already working, but it could potentially open up new revenue streams with the DoD just based on the fact that they are compliant and are trusted.
And so it solidifies the business that they're doing and gives them marketing capabilities to take on more business because they're hitting the marks. And that's what you've seen from some of the clients, correct?
Yes, yes, and taking away all the added business and the marketing campaign, it's basic cybersecurity that should have been being done for a long time. So there's nothing in NIST 800-171, the controls that it calls out, that are outrageous. They're all sound cybersecurity practices that all of these companies should have been doing for years. So it's, if nothing else, it's a better way to protect their own business and their own bottom dollar, because you're going to reduce the risk of people getting into your system, making you take a reputational hit, making it so you do basically get banned from dealing with DoD information because you have had a breach, and it's.
So Netta, maybe you have any other? I have a couple more questions, but I wanted to make sure that I know you had a couple others. I wanted to make sure we get as much detail and knowledge out of Wes that we can for our folks, because CMMC is very, very involved.
So you are saying that just beyond the meeting regulation, CMC actually benefits companies strategically, right?
Yes, it
This is
does.
something that should be done as a basic cyber hygiene, right?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's just even without the strategic business needs for it, it's just the right thing to do. Just to protect the business.
And I think, Wes, obviously, when we think about CMMC, it feels very big, it feels very involved, and I'm sure smaller companies, either manufacturers or other organizations that don't really kind of have maybe the wherewithal from a compliance perspective. And for them, I think about like dates, right? And what they need to do. So if you were advising, if a small company is listening to this, can you give some information like, hey, here's the hard and fast dates, and here's the first couple of things you really need to do to kind of get yourself moving and then put you on a path. It might not get you to the defined destination, right away, but hey, what are some of the dates they need to know, and what are the things they need to just really kind of get some momentum and get moving?
Sure. So I think the first and most important date is that starting in November of this year, any new DoD contracts or modified task orders off of existing contracts will be requiring CMMC level 2 certification in them. So like I said earlier, that can play out a couple of ways. The official way is there's going to be a ramp up period where within the next year, a company will need to take a self-assessment on CMMC level 2 and go through and attest in the SPRS website to meeting or not meeting every single one of the controls. And then it has to be signed by a senior company official, like the CEO or a COO of the company, someone who can basically put his name on the line attesting that this information is correct.
So I think I want to kind of drill in on that. I think that's a great point, that someone definitively in senior management has to put their name on this. That's why it's critical to really understand and document and have, top down kind of buy-in, because ultimately someone's name is on this and it can't just be, kind of thrown to the side. Someone is responsible and accountable at the senior level, correct?
Yes, Rich. And to further that a little bit, we've seen it growing in the defense sphere recently, where people have come back and basically done a whistleblower suit against people that were attesting to having a perfect 110 SPRS score for their CMMC levels, and it was found out that the company really was nowhere close to that, and they were false attesting to it, and so they got served with a False Claims Act suit from the U.S. government, and this is happening more and more. So that's why when they redid the CMMC rules, they made sure and spelled out that it needed to be someone in authority at the company that was authorized to basically put their name on the line to attest to these controls being met.
So it's not just impact of lost business. There's a potential impact of punitive damages if we're falsifying where we are in that CMMC journey, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's important.
So Wes, from your perspective, from your expertise, so what are the common gaps that companies usually face with the requirements and documentation?
Sure. I think it really depends on where they are on their journey. There's a lot of companies that have really sound technical controls protecting their data, but that really wouldn't help them completely pass an assessment, because for every single control, you have to be able to have three things. You have to have a policy that says why you're doing something. You need to have a procedure that says how you're going to do it, and then you have to have a technical control or administrative control in place acting on that procedure. And then to show that all that is working, you have to have evidence of that. So if you aren't able to, let's say, show that you have a change management program in place. So whenever you are adding new software, there's no approval chain for it. If you have a policy that says you're doing that, but you don't have any paper trail of approving the items going through the change management, you're going to fail that control on the assessment. So, having a well thought out governance program and policy, procedures, and evidence will save you time and time again.
I think that's fantastic. And Wes, and I think I heard this, but I just want to make sure for our folks listening. Let's say they engage Compass to help them. We provide an assessment and we go through, we understand, here's the things we need to do, and so on and so forth. But even with that, am I off base that you need a an independent third party to actually do that? So you can do all this work and then you still need to kind of pass that independent assessment. Is that accurate?
That's completely accurate. So when I come in and work with the company, all I'm doing is helping prepare them for an eventual assessment that they will need to have. We will support them in that, but at the end of the day, it's their assessment, it's their data, it's their environment. So they are the ones that are going to have to sit for the assessment, and that's another long lead and very expensive item that a lot of companies aren't thinking of. Let's say I started working with a company now, it may, depending on the readiness of the company, it may be 6 to 12 months before they're ready to sit for an assessment. But because there are very few C3PAO organizations right now, it could take up to 6 to 8 months to get on somebody's list to be able to have your C3PAO assessment. So it's a long process right now, just because number one, you have to make sure all your controls in your environment are set up correctly. But then even to schedule an assessor, because they're in such high demand, there can be a little bit of a wait before you can actually sit for that and hopefully pass your assessment.
It's reasonable to think that if they started tomorrow, this could be a 2-year journey to get across the finish line. So obviously there's a need to start sooner rather than later. Is that fair?
That is correct. And talking to my other colleagues that work for other companies, we've been seeing this across the board, where there's all sorts of people and companies that we've worked with for quite a while, and new companies coming from out of the blue that are all now just wanting to start their CMMC journey in earnest.
It's awesome.
So to finish up, what do you think companies should do now?
Yeah. I think the most important thing for a company to do now is do a little internal soul searching and see if, based on the amount of business they have, if pursuing a CMMC level 2 certification is the right thing for them. And if it is, they need to make plans to talk to someone in the space that can help them, and make sure that they're being advised correctly to basically not make any bad decisions and not waste any time or money going down roads that they don't need to go down to become certified.
It's awesome. And I think, and Wes, obviously fantastic information. Great job. If you were to kind of put a bow on this and you could speak directly to folks, what would be your kind of closing message on what you would want folks to take away from this?
Sure. I would say that it's, I would urge everyone to make progress as fast as they can towards becoming CMMC level 2 certified. Talk to somebody, talk to me, talk to a strategic advisor, that you use for cybersecurity, talk to your MSP. Just talk to someone about making progress towards CMMC and see what you need to do. At the end of the day, this isn't about getting more business for you. It's about protecting the DoD's controlled unclassified information that really, when it's lost and it's compromised, does put the United States at a disadvantage. There have been numerous cases of contractor-controlled CUI becoming compromised. by third parties. And that is why we're in the situation we're in now, where the DoD is going to require third-party assessments to making sure that everyone is protecting the data as they could. So do your part for national security, and at the same time, do your part for your business by protecting the data that you've been entrusted with. And hopefully, if you're ahead of the curve enough, it will make you a differentiator in your space and will drive more business your way.
That
Yeah.
is awesome. I get to work with Wes every day. He is very passionate about this. Compass MSP has a great program. Not saying that's the only player, but for someone like Wes, has a wealth of knowledge, been doing this for decades, and can really guide you through this, you need qualified professionals like Wes to help you with that and to get you across the finish line, because it will impact your business. These controls and these requirements are not going away. They are going to be enforced. So I think it's super important. Listen, Wes, thank you so much for this. This has been fantastic. Obviously, Aneta, fantastic on your side as well. To everyone, thank you for joining us for this episode. We are now on most major platforms, including YouTube, Apple, Spotify. It'd be helpful if you could subscribe and share our podcast, rate it, and review to help us and improve and reach a broader audience. There's a lot more in store for Unencrypted Chatter and this podcast and others from the ISC Squared New Jersey chapter. Great information, great stuff, and Wes, appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me.